A week later, I arrived in Prague, a suburb of Warsaw on the right bank of the Vistula. I hoped to find my brother in Warsaw, and to do so I had to cross to the other side. To my dismay, it turned out that the Germans were heavily guarding all the bridges, combing through the streams of refugees travelling to Warsaw and taking away all men of draft age. And that meant a prisoner of war camp and being sent to Germany. That's the last thing I wanted. Before going to sea, I worked for some time in Warsaw, in a yacht club, whose boathouses were in Prague, on the bank of the Vistula. Without hesitation, I went there and found several whole boats, launched one of them, and after sailing 800 metres, I moored to the opposite shore. I could clearly see the Germans on the bridge checking the refugees, but no one paid the slightest attention to me. I jumped ashore, dragged the boat onto the sand.
Antek had a flat with all the comforts of home in a new building on Filtrovaya Street. I had to walk across town. I walked through streets littered with the rubble of buildings, past houses destroyed in bombings and burned down. Right on the streets, in courtyards, squares and parks, I saw hastily dug graves. Women, old men and children were rummaging through the rubble, looking for something.
A little over 6 weeks ago, when I left for the army, I left Warsaw a happy, blooming city. Now there were ruins everywhere, and German patrols walked the streets past fresh graves. We had to hurry. It was getting dark fast, and curfew was coming. When I reached the right street and turned the corner, I saw that just above the part of the house where Antek's flat was, the house had been badly damaged in the bombings. There were many graves in the courtyard. I entered the entrance and went up to the right floor. Outside the door of Antek's flat, I heard voices. One clearly belonged to Antek's wife, Jadza. I knocked on the door. Silence. Knocked again, and after a short pause asked, Who's there? It's me. I shouted through the door. Silence again. It's me, Stefan. There was a shriek from behind the door, and I heard a joyful voice. It's Stefan. He's back. But the door was still closed. Let me in. I started banging on the door with my fist. Jadzia screamed, It's Stefan, and ran to the other end of the flat. Then I heard heavy footsteps. Antek opened the door and squeezed me in a hug. Thank God you're back and alive and well. Yes, as you can see, I'm fine. And how are you, Antek? How are all of us? Worried, I asked. They're all alive, and they haven't even got a scratch. What's more, we had a daughter, and during the bombing, when the upper floors were engulfed in flames, he led me into a room and showed me a little girl sleeping in a cot. She was born a few weeks premature, Jadzia explained, and there was no doctor or midwife around. What an adorable little girl, I said, looking at my niece. But how on earth did you manage it? I simply had no choice, Jadzia replied. She strove to be born when thousands were dying. Leaving the baby in the cot, we moved into the living room. Through the huge hole in the wall, we could see the whole street. Hey, I was just starting to fill the hole with bricks when you came in, Antek said. All the rooms that face the street were damaged in the bombing. The nights are getting colder and colder, and something has to be done. Looking at me closely, Jadzia laughed. Where did you get those clothes? Did you decide to become a peasant? At first I didn't even recognize you. We exchanged stories about the war, and in the course of the conversation I learnt what happened to my brother and his wife after I left. During the offensive, the Germans bombed and shelled the city. When the Germans entered the city, there were new problems. There was no food, no proper housing. In broad daylight, the Gestapo grabbed people on the streets and carried out night arrests. Like many others, Antek and Jadzia did not stockpile food in case of war. There was literally nothing in their cupboards. So how did they and thousands of others manage to survive? First, they exchanged their clothes for a sack of peas from a peasant who came to Warsaw. They had watches and some jewellery, which they also exchanged for food. The most serious problem was the problem of feeding the baby. Jadzia could not feed the baby girl. Perhaps because of the horror she had endured, her milk had gone. That night I slept like a dead man and woke up only when Antek came into the room in the morning. When I opened my eyes, I saw that his hands were stained with blood. God, what's wrong with you? Are you hurt? I shouted, jumping out of bed. Look what I brought. Meat, you hear, meat. He held a huge piece of meat in his hands, looking at me triumphantly. Where did you get it? Where did you get it? In the street, of course. I cut off a piece of horse meat. That's really lucky. We have almost nothing of value left to trade. You killed a horse? I asked incredulously. No, I didn't. A crowd of people. They saw a peasant on a horse-drawn cart, stopped him, and killed him, my brother explained excitedly. I mean killed the horse, not the peasant. They tore the horse to pieces, and I managed to cut a piece off, too. That should be enough for a few days. Slowly we got the flat in order. We filled the shell holes with bricks, using earth mixed with water instead of mortar. We used water sparingly. We had to walk very far to get it. Naturally, the bath was not used. The cooker was heated with scraps of wood, found in the ruins. Once Antek found a pile of coal in the basement of a bombed-out house. We took a sack of coal and carried it home. But when we came back, there was nothing left of the heap. People did not waste time. Like thousands of others, Antek and I rummaged through the ruins, sometimes finding a little sugar, salt or flour, and sometimes decomposed corpses. Food was worth its weight in gold. No one knew how long it would all last. We needed food to survive. Just as in our childhood years during the First World War, so now all our thoughts were focused on finding food. We went to sleep and woke up thinking about food. The second problem, no less serious, was how not to fall into the hands of the Germans during the frequent raids. They always appeared unexpectedly. Lorries full of soldiers would suddenly block the street, and anyone who happened to be nearby at that moment would be pushed into the lorries. Few people managed to hide in an alley when they noticed the raid, and then, running through the ruins, ran out into a neighbouring street. It was never known who was being hunted. Sometimes they took only Jews, then men under 40 or only old people. Sometimes, however, a rumour would fly around that they were going to a particular district, and then a raid could be avoided. But more often the cry of raid was heard together with the squealing of the brakes of German lorries blocking the street and the stomping of the boots of German soldiers running after the people caught by surprise. As the Germans drove away, people who had happily escaped arrest emerged from the shelters. They looked around fearfully, fearing that the Germans might return. Sometimes the Germans would do such things. We led an animal existence, constantly searching for food and hiding from our pursuers. After months of occupation, life gradually improved, but it was still a long way off. In the first week of November 1939, a month after the Wehrmacht attacked Poland, Warsaw was in chaos. The city was plagued by famine, and only the strong and healthy, the determined could survive. People were in shock from the sudden total defeat in the war and the German occupation. In the first days, there was not even a thought of any resistance. There was talk of some young men who had fled to Romania, Hungary, and other countries in the hope of reaching France, where they were going to organize a Polish army. In addition, there were rumours around Warsaw that the British fleet had almost completely destroyed the German navy. There was talk of massive bombing of Berlin, of a Franco-British landing in Germany. People like to take wishful thinking for reality, and we were no exception. We Poles hated the Germans, individually and collectively. And it was a mutual hatred. They believed in the military power of their state and in their racial superiority. We relied on centuries of experience and our own national pride. The unthinkable cruelty of the German soldiers and the humiliation to which the inhabitants of Warsaw were subjected drove some people to extremes. They burned with a thirst for revenge. When a dead body of a German soldier was found in a remote street, the Germans would shoot on the spot from 10 to 20 Poles who fell into their hands. Revenge came at too high a price. One of these massacres took place not far from where I had docked a few weeks before. I got on there with a homemade fishing rod in the hope of catching fish. There were many people on the shore who had come there for the same purpose. I took a comfortable spot as I arrived quite early. After catching a few rather large fish, I decided to go home, at which time I heard a desperate shout. Raid! Lorries appeared on the street and soldiers started to jump out of them. They lined up in a line, rifles in hand, and moved towards us, gradually narrowing the ring. We scattered. Someone jumped into the Vistula. Shots rang out and the man disappeared under the water. There were shouts and cries. Some tried to break through the encirclement, but the soldiers immediately threw them back into the crowd with their rifle butts. We jostled, trying to find a loophole in the dense wall of German soldiers advancing from all sides. There were about 50 of us, desperately shouting and resisting. At first the Germans pinned us against the wall of a house, and then began to move us to the end of the street where a machine gun had already been set up. We realized what this meant. Pressed against each other, we pulled back, but the soldiers coming after us forced us to follow in the given direction. We moved slowly along the wall of some factory. My face was bleeding from abrasions and scratches, my clothes were torn. The crowd carried me, obeying the orders of bayonets and rifle butts. A man of enormous stature walking beside me was leading a woman who was no longer thinking straight, shoving those who were walking beside him with his hands. He put his elbow on my throat, and I felt myself choking. With one hand, I couldn't lift the other. I started to hit him. Then he raised his big fist and hit me angrily on the head. For a moment I lost consciousness and began to slowly settle down. I must say that I came to my senses quite quickly. I was lying on the ground, and in front of me there were a lot of feet kicking each other and me. There was someone else lying next to me. Step by step the Germans were moving their prey along the pavement, and the crowd was pulling us lying under its feet. I was in a semi-conscious state, but I noticed a large metal grate, under which I discerned a window to the cellar. The crowd swung against the wall, and I saw ahead a gap between the bars of the grating, about 30 centimetres wide. At the cost of tremendous effort, I began to make my way to the saving space. First, I put my hand through my head, and then my other hand. The grating was shaking under the weight of the constantly moving crowd, and I gradually pushed my way lower and lower. When my head was down, I got up, put my back against the basement window and my feet against the opposite wall, pushed myself up, broke the window, and fell down into the cellar with a crash. Somewhat stunned, I was just about to look for a way out of the basement when someone fell on top of me, rolled and breathing heavily, fell silent. The cellar became somewhat brighter, for the Germans had already driven all the prisoners off the bars, and I saw a woman lying on the floor. Her clothes, like mine, were torn and her face was bleeding. Unable to speak, we only looked at each other, and our thoughts were probably similar. We wanted to find a way out of the cellar. Suddenly she spoke. "This is the brewery. There's an exit to another street here." We found the door. It was unlocked. First up the stairs, then through the lobby into the courtyard where a few broken carts were lying around, and finally the exit to the other street. But there were Germans there too. Halt! We rushed back into the courtyard. 2 German soldiers ran after us. The woman ran in front. I followed. We rounded the corner, ran into the building, climbed the stairs, ran through a room piled with barrels, jumped out of it, and having already climbed another staircase, jumped up to the window. Gasping, she said, "There's a ladder leading to the roof." We opened the window. She climbed out first. I followed her. We climbed the ladder to the roof and settled behind a chimney. As we lurked, we could hear German soldiers running around the factory grounds looking for us. Then we heard sounds from the street where the raid was being carried out and from which we had managed to sneak away. We had a good view of what was going on in the street, because the roof where we were hiding, as well as part of the wall of the building, had been penetrated by a bomb or maybe a shell. The Germans, wielding their rifle butts, had lined up the prisoners, and a machine gun crew of 3 soldiers had already prepared to fire on command. We watched in horror as the tragedy unfolded below. Some resigned themselves to their fate and stood with their heads down. 2 knelt and prayed. A woman sobbed desperately, her face pressed into a man's chest. Her child was crying and clinging to its mother, but she was pushing it away from her and urging it to do something, probably to try to escape. Suddenly one of the prisoners threw himself into the river, followed by the other. But as soon as they came to the surface, the soldiers immediately shot them dead. The German officer unfolded a piece of paper, and the words of the order came to us. As an act of retaliation for the murder of a German soldier, shoot. His further words were drowned in screams and cries. Keeping her eyes wide open on the street, the woman lying next to me on the roof was crying, praying, cursing. Suddenly she raised herself on her elbow and began to threaten the Germans with her fist. "May you burn alive in hell. You sneaky bastards. You—" "Shut up." I interrupted her. "Shut up now." "Murderers." She wouldn't stop. "Children are bitches. You'll pay for this." "Shut up." Now I had to shout at her. "Shut up. Do you want them to hear you?" Instead of shutting up, she attacked me with rage. "You think you're a man, don't you? A miserable coward? That's what you are? Why don't you do anything? You're hiding here." Shut up. I couldn't take it anymore, I shouted. But she wouldn't shut up. I had to hit her hard several times to make her pass out. She did not hear the crack of the machine gun, which mowed down the lined-up prisoners, nor did she see how the unfortunates slowly settled to the ground, how the officer himself finished off those who were still alive, nor did she hear the curses that were now falling from my lips. The Germans got into the lorries and drove off. The birds that had flown up into the sky during the shooting descended on the roofs and trees. Later, people began to appear on the street. They cautiously approached the bodies lying on the ground and turned them over, gazing intently into the grey faces. From time to time a scream was heard, and a man would fall to his knees in front of the still body, gently cradling the bloody body. He stroked it and whispered words of love and vows, or he would freeze, staring fixedly into space. I shuddered when I heard the sobs of a random companion. I didn't even notice when she came to her senses. The Germans left and we sat on the roof and were silent, but we couldn't have been here long. Do you think they all left the factory? I broke the long silence. I think so. They never stay inside the buildings. They're not here now, but they might come back. Then they'll definitely find us and shoot us like they did the ones downstairs. But we're still alive, aren't we? How long can we live? A few days? Weeks? Months? She cut me off abruptly, waiting as if you were a sheep to be slaughtered. No, it's not for me. What are you going to do? I asked. Do you want to tear their heads off? Or, like David, smite them with stones with a sling, and they'll shoot innocent people in return? She was silent for a while, looking at the street, where the bodies of people shot by the Germans were being taken away. Yes, she said thoughtfully, that's not the way. That's not the way. When it got dark, we went down from the roof and through the courtyard to the street. The blood was caked, and I moved to the river to wash my face. Let's go to my place, the woman suggested. I live not far from here. You can wash and change your clothes at my place. She did indeed lie very close by, in the street next to the brewery, in a miserable shack. Opening the door, she entered the room and lit an oil lamp. In the room stood a chair, a bed, 2 chairs. On the wall hung several pictures. The woman disappeared behind a partition and soon reappeared with a basin, soap, a towel and a piece of sausage. Now I could scrutinize my casual companion. She looked to be in her early 30s, quite attractive. She had bleached her hair. I realized this because the roots of her hair were dark. There were still traces of nail polish on her chipped nails. Her clothes could tell nothing about her mistress. In those days, people wore anything from sackcloth to luxurious, but filthy outfits unless they could trade them for food. The poor furnishings, however, did not tell anything either. Such were the times. After washing up and having a light snack, I stood up, getting ready to leave. Don't go. I don't want to be alone, the woman complained. Besides, it's curfew. I explained that I had to go home as my brother must be worried. Better to come back tomorrow than never, she said, and noticing my hesitation, she added, I just want to talk to you. I've been thinking. I sat down, but she was silent again. She was deep in thought, resting her chin on her interlocked fingers, but she suddenly perked up and asked, Martin, how many people were shot today? That you're 25. 25. For one German, but that's wrong, isn't it? Of course it is, I agreed. It's stupid to kill them that way, isn't it? Of course, because they were helpless people. You misunderstand me. I didn't mean ours, I meant the Germans. Are you mourning one German soldier while they kill our people? No, not at all. I'm saying it's stupid to kill Germans and leave their corpses out in the open. That will always lead to mass shootings. I've only heard about it before, but today I saw it with my own eyes. I'll never forget it. Never. She shouted the last words with such fury that I even shuddered. The anger turned to tears. She burst into tears, dropping her head on the table. I swear to God I will take revenge. As long as I live, I will kill. God is my witness. She shouted again. I waited silently for her to calm down. Will you help me? The woman suddenly asked. I can't do it alone. As I hesitated to answer, she added, I know how you can dispose of murdered Germans. In this case, there will be no massacres. Well, how? The sewage treatment system of the brewery where we were hiding today is connected to the city system that drains waste into the Vistula. I see your point, but in a few days the bodies will resurface. We can tie rocks to them. What if they start searching the bottom and find a body in a German uniform? We could strip them and burn the uniforms. But if they're missing people, they'll come looking for them. That's right, but you don't understand. Until they find the bodies, there'll be no reprisals. They'll think the soldiers just deserted. And how do we lure them to the brewery? We'll just go out on the street and say to all the Germans passing by, "Would you be so kind as to come in here?" That's my job. I'll bring them in. Ow! Will you sing or dance in front of them? Say amen, she shouted, and I, as you may have noticed, am a woman. It's your business to shoot, she replied sharply, when they're inside. Good plan. I said snidely. The shots will be heard by the others, and we'll be in over our heads. Well, then you can strangle them or hit them over the head with something heavy. There's all sorts of ways that won't make too much noise. I didn't see fit to answer. Well, what do you say? She couldn't stand it. I remained stubbornly silent. Then go to hell if you're so weak. Go and enjoy your life while our people are being killed. Go away. They might kill you tomorrow, they might kill you next week. They might as well kill you, I replied. They might, but I'll still have time for revenge. She was trembling with anger and emotion. Have you ever killed a man? I asked, looking at her point blank. No, I haven't. But after today's events, I'd do it without hesitation. And you think you can bring Germans into the brewery? I'm sure I can, she said firmly. So what's next? Ed, everything has to be very carefully thought out, I replied. Otherwise we're finished, and not only us, but many others who have nothing to do with our plan. So I don't understand. Do you agree? Yes. She explained that she knows the factory well, because her father worked there before the war. The factory was partially damaged in the bombings, and there's no one there except the occasional passerby who digs through the rubble. Water from a treatment pipe that connects to the city's sewage system is discharged into the river. The factory also has furnaces where German uniforms will be burned. We decided to meet tomorrow afternoon, look round the place and make the necessary preparations. It was getting late, so I suggested we get some sleep. You can lie here. Start getting used to it. If we succeed in putting our plan into action, you'll have to spend many nights at my place. We ate the rest of the sausage and drank water. My casual acquaintance gave me some covers from the bed. I spread them on the floor and lay down. Switching off the lamp, she undressed and got into bed. Sleep did not come, and I suddenly thought that I had never learnt her name. All this time we had been addressing each other as Pan and Pi. My name is Stefan, and you? Janina. And then? Just Janina, Messi answered, and without too much ceremony. Added day quiet, I think. Early in the morning, having arranged with Janina to meet her in the afternoon, I went home to reassure Antek and Jadzia. They were, of course, terribly worried, for they had heard about the shooting on the bank of the Vistula, and they knew that I had gone fishing. I told Antek and Jadzia the story of my happy rescue and told them about Janina, but I did not mention our plans. No, thank God, Stefan, that you are alive, said Jadzia. In the afternoon I met Janina, and we went to the brewery. She showed me a room overlooking the courtyard and told me that the manager's office used to be here. There were various documents, scraps of bills, and beer labels lying on the floor. There was a cooker in the corner of the room. What do you think, Stefan? Janina asked and answered her own question. It's a good place. We can't be seen from the street, so we don't have to fear German patrols. The hatch is not far away either. She waved her hand in the direction. No, it's not suitable, I replied. I won't be able to see when you turn up. They're all armed. They need to be caught off guard and stunned. At first strike. That's the way to do it, not the other way round. I was thinking the same thing. Come here. I'm here. Stand here and look out the window. What do you see? A mirror. What else? The road and the entrance to the factory. The mirror was put there a long time ago. The manager used to watch when people came to work, so you'll be able to see it as soon as we get there so you can get ready. Anything else? She flushed with excitement. She could sense she was eager to get into action. Let's clean this place up a little, I suggested. Sure. We'll put all the papers in one corner. I'll get a blanket and we'll cover this pile of paper, and it'll be kind of like a bed. That's great. Let's do it. We cleaned up the room, and while Janina went to get a blanket, I started looking for something like a club. When I found a broken table, I unscrewed its leg. I couldn't find anything better. Then I tamped the beer labels into the box. It made a sort of chair. I sat on it and looked through the window into the mirror. A dog ran into the courtyard, and here comes Janina with a package under her arm. She had put on makeup, tied her head, and dressed well. When she entered the room, she unwrapped the bundle, took out a blanket and covered the paper pile with it. Then she took out a box and a piece of sausage from her coat pocket. "I need a drink." "Do you want one?" she asked, holding out the canteen to me. "No, absolutely not." "I need a steady hand." "I'll need a steady hand," she said, and took a decent sip. We cut the sausage in half and chewed hard. "Is that all you've got?" Janina asked, nodding at the table leg. "Yes, I have a dagger." "And I have a knife," she said, and took out an ordinary bread knife with a serrated edge from the inside pocket of her coat. "We won't need it." "Well, I'll bring a better one tomorrow." "If there's a tomorrow for us." "Are you sure you want to go ahead with the plan?" I'm sure of it. We have to kill our first German tonight." "It's the effect of the alcohol," I decided. I wasn't so sure. We discussed the plan once more. She should lure the German and enter the room first. As soon as the German appears following Janina, I am to hit him on the head so that he passes out, and then stab him with a dagger. Then we undress him, tie a brick round his neck. There was a whole pile of bricks in the yard, and throw him down the chimney. The stream carries the corpse into the river and it sinks to the bottom. We hoped it would never resurface. Afterwards, we burn the uniform and run home to Janina. We agreed that if anything went wrong, we each had to work it out ourselves. Janina went on a mission. I sat on an improvised pedestal and looked in the mirror. As time passed, I suddenly realized a serious flaw in our plan. We had completely overlooked the fact that the mirror would be completely useless in the dark. I was already running out of time to warn Janina. In spite of the curfew, she was wandering round the street making eyes at the Germans. I could only rely on my own hearing. Several times, hearing footsteps in the street, I rushed to the door with a club in my hand. Then 2 dogs came barking into the courtyard and made a terrible fuss. When they finally fled, a small figure skipped noiselessly across the yard, apparently barefoot, and into the other street. There was silence for a while, and then I heard a lorry drive slowly down the embankment. I was drenched with exertion. Sweat beaded my eyes and trickled down my back. Finally there were footsteps, and I heard Janina's voice speaking in broken German. "Na, das ist teuer, mein Hedi too." In the darkness I could make out 2 figures. I stood outside the door, holding the baton with both hands. Janina entered. The German lingered thoughtfully in the doorway and lit a torch. The beam swept round the room and stopped on the improvised bed. Bitting 3. Smiling appealingly, Janina went to the bed, taking off her coat as she went. The German stepped into the room, and I struck him on the head with my baton. He fell silently to the floor, letting the torch out of his hand. Janina quickly picked it up, and, pointing the beam into the German's face, shout, "Merdin Semish, hurry up!" I began to strike with the dagger. 1, another, 3. The German soldier jerked a few times and fell silent. He was dead. "Now into the sewers," Janina commanded. "No, we have to undress him first. Come here and help me." He quickly pulled off his clothes, dragged him out into the courtyard, tied a brick to his arms, legs and neck and pushed him down the manhole. Back in the room, we stuffed all his clothes in the stove and set fire to them. Janina wanted to keep the watch and the ring, but I was adamantly against it. No, too dangerous. They could easily be recognized. Wasting no time, while the fire was destroying the evidence, we covered the traces of blood in the room and in the yard with sawdust. We cleaned everything up and sat on the bed waiting for the fire to go out. I was completely exhausted. Soaked with exertion, I seemed unable to utter a word right now. It bled all over the place. Janina broke the silence. So much blood, as if we'd slaughtered a pig. In the flickering firelight, I noticed a bottle sticking out of her coat pocket, took it out and took a big gulp. "Shall we keep the torch?" Janina asked. "It might come in handy." "Let's keep it, but let's get it out of here." The room smelled of burning cloth and blood. It was too late to go back to Antek, so I spent the night at Janina's again. Surprisingly, I slept quite well, even though twice during the night I was awakened by Janina's moaning. Apparently she was having nightmares. The next day Janina and I did not meet. I had to go to the village to get milk for my little niece, as Antek had gone to town in search of food for all of us. But the next day we killed another German, the next night another. So far we got away with it. The bodies rested at the bottom of the river. The unsuspecting Germans didn't raid. Driven by hatred and a thirst for revenge, we did not, however, celebrate our successes. We felt a sense of satisfaction, but killing did not give us pleasure. Yes, we killed, but how hard it was for us. For 11 nights we killed Germans and lowered them into the river, after which I stayed the night at Janina's. Soon I moved from the floor to the bed of the hospitable hostess. She was both a gentle and passionate mistress, and I felt very good with her. Chapter 9. It was the 3rd week of November. I had not seen Janina for 4 days. On my way back from the village, I'd been attacked by a gang of bandits and beaten so badly that I had to be on bed rest. There were several gangs like that around Warsaw. They attacked people returning to the city and robbed them of food. I had not yet had the bandage removed from my head. I was covered with bruises and abrasions. But as soon as I felt a little better, I went across town to Janina's house in the afternoon. She wasn't at home. I walked around for a while and went back to her house again. The door was locked, and she didn't answer no matter how hard I knocked. She had been taken away and never came back. The woman who lives next door to Janina told me. Who took her? The Germans, who else? In the last days she drank a lot and then bragged everywhere about killing Germans. Actually, she always drank too much. When was she taken? Yesterday. Early in the morning. They came for her in a lorry. You're lucky you haven't been to see her all this time, or they'd have taken you too. Before I left, I asked the woman to tell Janina I'd come to see her. Hey, I told her you'd come, but she thought you'd abandoned her. It was the booze. She liked to drink too much. I came the next day and the day after that, but Janina never showed up. I would have come every day, but I noticed a civilian following me. It took me quite a while to sneak away from him. Although he didn't look Polish, he knew Warsaw well. I figured he was Gestapo. Are they following me? What had they done to Janina that she was talking? I returned home to Antek, but as you know, trouble doesn't come alone. It was raining, and I absent-mindedly put on my officer's overcoat instead of my usual coat. Later I remembered that when I was walking along the street I caught a few surprised glances, but I did not pay much attention to them. Having taken a full bucket of water, I went back to the house and a German lorry drove towards me. I heard the screech of brakes and the stomping of soldiers' boots behind me. It did not occur to me that someone might be running after me. There was a sharp. "Ande Hutch?" I turned round and was surprised to see a pistol pointed at me. "Mali wo, Sachi," repeated the soldier threateningly. "Ich can nich," I said with a smile. Each trade was survive. And it was true, for I had a full bucket of water in each hand. "Was Wolan Sai, bitte 6?" I asked, still not understanding why he ran after me. "Du bist ein polnische Offizier?" 7 asked the soldier. "Not in 82. Und was ist das?" 9 laughing, he pointed to the lieutenant's star on my shoulder. And only then I realized that I was wearing an overcoat. A second soldier was already slowly coming towards us, and I, without thinking long, struck one bucket on the gun, threw the other in the face of the soldier in front of me, and rushed into the courtyard. Everything was done so quickly that the Germans did not even have time to open fire. I naturally did not run home, but through a break in the wall I jumped out into the neighbouring street and hid in the ruins. I managed to escape, but I was well aware that the flat would be watched, so I couldn't go home. Besides, they must have noticed that my head was bandaged. I tore off the bandage and felt the blood dripping from the still healing wound onto my neck. I spent the night in the ruins. In the morning, hungry, shivering from the cold running away from the Germans, I threw my overcoat. Looking around, I approached our house, hesitating to enter. Antek, who had learnt about what had happened, was waiting for me outside the house. We found a secluded place to talk quietly. "I already know everything," Antek said. "Where did you sleep tonight?" "Oh, in the ruins. Did they come to you? Did they ask you questions?" "No, they didn't." "Hey, they will. They will. There's no one else in the house with a bandaged head. They'll probably spot." My brother examined my head and wiped the blood away with the rag he used for a handkerchief. "Yes, I must leave immediately or I'll get you into trouble." "You have nowhere to go, Stefan." "I'm going to Krakow. I hope Mum and Lita are alive. They'll be happy to know you're all right. Don't talk rubbish, Antek said angrily. How are you going to get there? On foot. How else? Although I heard that the Germans have already started trains to Krakow, I'll get on some train and get there comfortably. I'll beg and steal. After all, that's what everyone does nowadays. They can catch you, Stefan. Krakow is no safer than Warsaw. They'll flee abroad. I've heard that many are fleeing through Hungary to France. They're forming a Polish army there. I could be useful, but the first thing I want to do is to see my mum, if she's still alive. Poor Mum, Antek sighed. The war will never end for her. We decided that for safety reasons it would be better for me to stay away from home. Antek took me to his mate, who agreed to take me in for the night, and he returned home. Early in the morning my brother came to fetch me. He brought some clothes, some sugar, a large loaf of bread and a piece of dried horse meat. Not only that, he gave me 2 gold rings and a pair of pearl cufflinks. We have no money, he said, and no use for it, but you can always exchange the jewellery. I realized that he had kept these things to exchange them for food for the family, and I tried to refuse, but he would not listen. We sat in silence, though there was so much we wanted to say to each other, but the words were stuck somewhere inside us. When are you thinking of leaving? Thursday's afternoon. I'll stick to the railway. When it gets dark, I'll try to get into a railway carriage. If I'm lucky, I'll get to Krakow. Antek braced himself as best he could, trying not to show how worried he was. I hope, he said with a smile, you will return from France as a general, or rather an admiral. Or in a year, well, at the most, in 2. Maybe even sooner. Stefan, and then his voice trembled, will be waiting for you, safe and sound. I mean, I love you, my little brother. I felt like a little brother again for a minute, as if all these years had gone by. I'll be back, Antek, I promised. Soon we'll meet again in Warsaw. You'll see. We hugged each other tightly, and then, looking into each other's eyes, said at the same time, "No idzieniate," into the Anns, not to worry about us. We will survive this war as we survived the last one, he said as he went down the stairs. I rushed to the window to wave goodbye to him, but he was already gone. 17 years had passed since I had last seen my brother. One evening, while working on this book, I suddenly thought of my brother, of how much he meant to me. The next day I received a letter from Poland informing me that Antek was gone. The sudden death. A bullet left over from the war had cut off the blood flow and his heart had stopped. You may ask, where did this bullet come from? In 1945, Soviet soldiers broke into my brother's house. Antek tried to protect his wife. The soldiers spared no bullets on him and threw him down, thinking he had been killed. The Polish doctor extracted 3 bullets from him, but did not notice the 4th. The remaining bullet killed my brother 12 years later. At noon, I left Warsaw and moved southwards, sticking to the railway tracks. At daylight, I reached Piaseczno, where I met some people who were going to Krakow. I took shelter under a bridge that had been destroyed during the war, and later the Germans temporarily restored traffic on it. At the bridge, the trains were slowing down, and I hoped that I would be able to jump into a carriage. The Polish railway workers, whom the Germans were forcing to work, told us that there would be a goods train to Krakow at night. The trains were guarded, but we hoped for luck. Our hopes were justified. On the road I had a lot of free time. I remembered how in my childhood, in the company of village boys, I used to jump on the goods trains passing near our village. My mother was terribly frightened when she learnt about it. She was well aware that for peasant boys it was not just a game. As a rule, they chose coal-laden trains. Climbing into the carriage, they would throw out pieces of coal, and then, jumping off the train, they would collect them and carry them home. The next day around noon, the train was already travelling through the outskirts of Krakow. The guards saw me jumping out of the carriage, but I realized that they would not pursue me. However, as a precaution, I lay down in the ditch into which I had rolled when I jumped out of the carriage, and only got out when the train disappeared from sight. Just before the war, my sister had moved to the suburbs. Her husband had found a job as a labourer in Krakow. 20 minutes later, I was already approaching her house. The first one to see me was my sister's 9-year-old son, Jerry. Without even saying hello, the boy rushed home, and I heard his son's ringing voice. Uncle Stefan? Uncle Stephen is here. My sister was already running towards me. Her house had hardly been damaged during the war. There were only bullet marks on one of the outer walls of the house, and in some places in the wallpaper in the room, you could see the marks of stray bullets that had flown into the room through the windows. What about Mum? Do you get any news from Gazelovka? I asked Lida when we finally loosened our embrace. Mum came to see me a week before the war started. So where is she? Where is she now? In a hospital in Krakow. She was hit by a German lorry. Both her legs are broken. Lida told me that in Krakow, the Germans have invented a new amusement. They pick a victim, chase her with a car, and then run her down. Mum was one of them. When can I see her? I will catch you immediately, Uncle, if you go to your grandmother's house, said Lida's son. They do raids every day. Yes, Stefan Jiria is right. In the last week they caught all the men of draft age in Krakow and sent them to Germany. You're lucky you managed to get through the city without any trouble. Hey, I wasn't in the city. I jumped off a goods train travelling from Warsaw through Krakow before reaching the city. That's when Franek, Lida's husband, came into the room. Did you raid the fields? I asked Franek when I saw a few potatoes in his hands. No, not at all. I brought them from the cellar. We have a cellar full of potatoes. It's all Lidina's foresight. Just before the war, she filled the cellar with potatoes. Women's intuition, she says. Yes, that's great. At least you'll have a potato supply. In Warsaw, I had to walk 20 miles a day to dig some potatoes in the field. We decided that Jiri would go to the hospital and warn my mother of my arrival. The sudden appearance of her favourite son might have shocked her. Jiri went to the hospital, and Lida started looking for suitable clothes for me. After washing and shaving, I put on the outfit Lida had prepared. It all fit me, and I went to look in the mirror. A village girl with a scarf on her head, laughing at the top of her lungs, looked at me from the mirror. I wore this dress at the last picnic before the war, said Lida. I've always liked national outfits and looking me over from all sides, she added. If our old coachman Felix were here, he'd probably pinch your soft spot, Stefan. I'm quite pleased with myself, sister, but I don't think the Germans will like it too much. I'll have to flee if they realize what a grave mistake they've made. Hey, there are a lot of masked men in town now. But most importantly, remember, you're a woman. Lida and I walked through the city without adventure. On the way, Lida told me that in the hospital there is a first aid station where German nurses and a doctor work. They supervise the Sisters of Mercy and keep a close eye on them. No one stopped us at the entrance to the hospital, and following Lida, I entered the ward where Mum was lying. I kissed her hand, and she hugged my head. Tears were rolling down her cheeks. I told her that Antek was alive and doing well. Murdered, Mum whispered soothingly. Hey, you have become a grandmother once again. Jadzia gave birth to a daughter. She is wrinkled like an old woman, but with black hair. How much did she weigh at birth? Well, I honestly don't know. I hesitated. It hadn't occurred to me to ask Jadzia. Shame on you, Mum reproached me with a smile. And a woman, but then tears came to her eyes again, and she pressed my head to her breast. I was afraid that I would die without seeing my baby, said my mother, crying. But God heard my prayers and even gave me a granddaughter. It's more than I could have dreamed of. Lida and I sat next to Mum, holding her hands, and were silent. There is an addition to our family. Coping with tears, Mum said. It's just wonderful. Thank God everyone is alive. I will pray to God to give me the opportunity to live to the end of the war, to know that the Germans are trampled into the mud, destroyed, wiped off the face of the earth. Remembering the horrors of the last war, she became indescribably furious. They were at Gazilovka again. All the cattle and horses have been taken away again. They're taking away the food. They kicked Tamars out of the manor. They sleep in my bed. They sit at my table. Burn alive in hell. Is there no justice in this world? Mum asked if we remembered escaping from the burning house. She was getting more and more excited, going back to memories of the last war. I will kill them, ruthlessly, and I hope you will have no compassion for them either. They don't deserve it. You must hate them. Kill them every chance you get. An eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. For every one of ours we must kill 2 Germans. She didn't know about the German repression, and we decided to spare her the details. Mum had to be calmed down. because the sick started to complain. Stop it. Do you want the Germans to run here? Mum, pale, leaned back powerlessly on the pillow. She had not had an easy time with this emotional outburst, and I could not bring myself to tell her about my intention to flee abroad. It would have been too much for the first day. We agreed that I would come to see her again tomorrow, and kissed goodbye. Lydia and I talked all the way home. Hey, how serious is Mum's condition? I asked my sister. Extremely serious. Both her legs are broken above the knee. Apparently her pelvic bones are broken, but there's no X-ray. The Germans stole all the equipment. She's in plaster from her hips to her ankles. But that's not the most important thing. She's terribly worried about us, worried about Gazelka. She's annoyed by the daily presence of Germans. It's taking a toll on her health. Me, tomorrow I want to tell her about my decision to go abroad. How will she take it? Hey, I have no idea, Stefan. She'll either give you her blessing or she'll be totally against it. You see, she still thinks of you as a baby. To her, you'll always be her youngest son. That's what worries me the most. Do you really want to run away abroad, Stefan? Yes, Lida. I think I'll have a better chance of getting even with the Germans there. I can't wait for things to change here. When else will it be? I can't even think of hiding month after month, year after year. I don't want to have a masquerade and dress up as a peasant to walk through town. I can't stand this life any longer. Have you heard of anyone who has safely escaped abroad? Lida asked. I, for example, do not know about it. It is clear that you do not know. The Germans intercept all letters coming from abroad. Wait. I heard that the Germans are capturing whole groups of people trying to escape from Poland. They can't get me. I'll run away from them, as I've done many times before. All the more reason for you to be especially careful not to fall into their hands. By the way, when are you going to leave? Right after I talk to Mum. Are you going alone? Who do you think I'm going with? I don't know anyone here. Our neighbour's son wants to go abroad. He's about your age and he's very determined and healthy. I'd like to talk to him tonight. How would you like that? Stanislav was a year younger than me. He had already escaped from the Germans and was keen to go abroad. He had some detailed maps which we sat over all night. Stanislav was a keen mountaineer, knew the Tatra Mountains well, and suggested we go over the mountains to Czechoslovakia. I insisted on Hungary, believing that the Hungarians would treat us better than the Czechs. There were already thousands of Polish soldiers in Hungary who had escaped in whole regiments during the September fighting. From there we could move to France in an organized way. My arguments were more convincing, and at night we decided to flee to Hungary in 2 days. We should still have discussed all the details. When I arrived at the hospital the next day, I could not gather my courage to tell my mother about my decision. Several times I tried to turn the conversation in the right direction, but at the last moment I changed the subject. It was my mother. She was tensely looking into my eyes and listening attentively to my stories about life in Warsaw, about Antek and his family. I was afraid that the news that I would not be in Krakow tomorrow and that I would not see her for a long time would kill her. The agonizing doubt was probably reflected on my face. My mother asked me to lean closer and whispered softly, "Don't worry. I know everything already." "What do you know?" I asked in surprise. "Say that you want to escape from Poland. Jiri came today and told me everything." So, you're not going to talk me out of it?" "No, my boy, I don't mind." I started kissing her hands. I was so grateful to Mum for understanding. She put her arms round my head and kissed my forehead. "No," she continued, "I don't mind. God willing, I'll wait for you to come back." Her patriotic sentiments were again aroused, and she said forcefully, "Go and show the world that Poles can fight. We do not give up, and we will never give up. Go, my boy," she said fondly. "Maybe God will take pity on you and you will come back alive. You are the first in our family who will be abroad fighting for your country. Take care of yourself and come back to us." "I'll be back, Mum," I promised. "I'll definitely come back. And now you can go," she said, holding my hand, and added, "God bless you." I dashed across Krakow to Lida's house. 17 years have passed since then. For Mum, the war never ended. She lived to see the Germans leave Poland, but the Russians took their place. Her baby, having survived the war, was unable to return to her because, having fought for his homeland in the West, He was declared a reactionary by the communist puppet government, and imprisonment awaited him on his return. Mum, never fully recovered from her injuries, died. She was unable to meet her youngest son. The Gazelovka, in which she had invested so much effort and of which she was so proud, was turned into a collective farm under the communists. Chapter 10. At night Stasik, as I began to call Stanislav, and I finished all the preparations. So we finally decided on Hungary. We decided that in order to save our strength we should, if possible, cross the border on German goods trains. We had to make some adjustments to our plan. As there was no direct branch line from Krakow to Hungary, we would have to jump from train to reach our desired destination, and once again I remembered my comfortable journey from Warsaw to Krakow. It turned out that we would have to travel during the day, and our hands would have to be free. On the other hand, we would be crossing mountains, which meant that we needed skis. It was the end of November, and without skis we would not be able to cross the snow-covered mountain slopes, but how to jump on a moving train with skis. We decided to get to Sanok, a few hundred miles southeast of Krakow, and there exchange the gold rings my brother had given me for 2 pairs of skis. On them to walk 50 miles south to the border and further into Hungarian territory. Stasik had a ski suit and boots, and Lida and I had to go round her friends, and by nightfall I had everything I needed too. We each took a loaf of bread, a large piece of horse meat sausage. At that time it was considered a delicacy in Poland. Lida baked some potatoes, and Franek brought half a bottle of rum. We had a detailed map of the border area, but what good was a map without a compass? Jerry came to the rescue. Promise to bring it back, Uncle. I'll definitely return the compass. Thanks, Jerry. We packed our rucksacks and waited for morning. I still don't understand why you decided to head for the Hungarian border when Czechoslovakia is much closer, Lida asked. The Tatras are much higher than the mountains we are going to cross. Besides, the Germans are in Czechoslovakia, and the Czechs would not hesitate to surrender us into their hands, added Stasik. But you're forgetting about the Ukrainians. Franek interrupted him. The villages around Sanok are full of Ukrainians. The Germans formed them into a kind of militia to catch Poles fleeing abroad. The Germans trick the Ukrainians into believing that Ukraine will become independent. There is a German-Soviet demarcation line near Sanok, Lida added. You should be very careful there too. We were well aware of the risks we were taking, but we were already gripped by pre-departure fever. We were eager to get on the road and did not want to pay attention to the difficulties. We were full of optimism, and I already saw myself in the ranks of the Polish army moving from Paris to Berlin. At night we hardly slept a wink. In the morning Lida prepared breakfast, but I could hardly eat. The reason was not that Lida had tears in her eyes when she set the table, nor that Jiri kept up with me asking, Uncle, when are you coming back? It was the first time since I had made the decision to flee abroad that I realized that the unknown lay ahead of me. I could not answer Jiri's question because I did not know my future. There was a knock on the door, and Stasek entered with his rucksack behind his back, fully prepared to leave. I got up from the table. Jiri and Franek helped me put on my rucksack. Lida looked at us, crumpling a handkerchief in her hand, not knowing what to talk about. We bombarded each other with empty questions, hiding our feelings behind them. Stashek tactfully stepped aside to let me say goodbye to my family. Don't cry, Lida, I said to my sister, trying to lighten the last moments of parting with a joke. You are so beautiful, but tears will make you look dull. Your face will swell up, your eyes will turn red. Don't cry. In a year, 2 years at the most, I'll be back. Okay, Stefan. A year from now, we'll be waiting for you. Even if the Germans kick us out of here, we'll go to Gazelovka, and after the war you'll go back there, said Lida, and smiling, added, just don't get mixed up with some woman abroad. I just won't have time for that, sis. Franek shook my hand firmly. Oh, don't put yourself in too much danger, Stefan, or you'll be in over your head, he said, giving me a friendly pat on the back. Now it was Jiri's turn. He rummaged in his pocket and took out a few lumps of sugar. This is for you, Uncle. The sugar had long since lost its natural white colour. It was covered with the dirt that always somehow accumulates in boys' pockets. I knew that sugar was rare, so I asked where my nephew had got it. A friend gave it to me, the child explained. Did you steal it? No. I exchanged my knife for sugar. Jiri confessed, and embarrassed by his own nobility, explained. Mum said that it would be very useful for you. Maybe you won't have any food in the mountains, and then you'll eat sugar. What would you like for it? I asked the boy, trying to hold myself like a man and hide my feelings. Nothing, uncle. I don't want anything, Nojri answered seriously. Just come back soon. I'll come back, Jerry. I'll definitely come back. Now let's shake hands goodbye. Stasik and his family stood silent as I approached them, and after saying goodbye, we set off at a brisk pace. We had only walked 100 paces when Jerry caught up with us. Uncle Stefan, you forgot something. Out of breath, he handed me the dagger I'd brought from Warsaw. You left it under your pillow. Thank you, Jerry. You're good. Goodbye, uncle, whispered the boy, and I saw him wiping his tears with his hand. He was just a little boy and couldn't hold back his feelings. Jerry reached out his arms, wrapped his arms around my neck and kissed me. Goodbye, uncle. Come back soon. After saying that, he turned and ran home. My cheeks were wet with tears, and I didn't realize whether they were mine or Jerry's. It took us almost the whole day to go around Krakow and reach the railway line leading east. As soon as it got dark, we managed to climb into a German freight train that was slowly pulling away from the station. Once on the platform, we saw that the train was carrying German field guns and vehicles. In the darkness, we didn't notice the guards, and we really hoped they didn't pay attention to us either. We crawled into the lorry and hid under a tarpaulin. In the lorry were empty wooden crates with lids. Let's hide in them, whispered Stasik. At first we tried to crawl into one crate together, but it was too cramped for the two of us, so we hid in the neighbouring crates. I put my rucksack under my head, got comfortable and closed the lid. The train rumbled at the joints, occasionally announcing its movement with steam engine horns. A few hours later I woke up to Stashek's banging and whispering. It was light. The train was standing. I pulled back the lid, stood up and saw that Stasik was also lying in the box, lifting the lids with one hand and resting the other on the edge of the box so that we could talk more comfortably. We resembled the characters from the painting The Day of the Last Judgment that hung in our church in Gazilovka. On it, the dead were lifting the lids and coming out of the coffins. At that memory, I laughed out loud. Stop it, Stefan. Stasik stopped me in a hoarse whisper. We are standing at the station. What station? I don't know. The train travelled back and forth along the station a few times, and we managed to read the name. It was Tarnow, about 95 kilometres east of Krakow. After manoeuvring, the train was pulled back to the spare tracks and we heard the voices of German guards passing us towards the station building. Well, what next, Captain? Stasik asked me. Shall we find out from the station master the schedule of trains to Sanok? Maybe we'd better look for Polish railwaymen. He looked through the hole he had made in the tarpaulin. We climbed out of the crates and put on our rucksacks in case we had to get out of here in a hurry. There are a few men standing there, Stasik said. Let's get their attention when they pass by. Maybe they'll give us some information about train traffic. As the railwayman approached the platform, Stasik quietly called out to him. The man obviously heard, but walked past. A few minutes later, however, he returned. What do you want? He asked, looking away. Where is this train going? Stasik asked. We have to go to Sanok. The train will stay here until tomorrow. I don't know of any other trains to Sanok on this line. There are trains southwards from Gorlice via Jaslo. After telling everything he knew, the man left, but soon returned. You'd better get out of here, and, warning our question, added, jump to the other side and go down to the embankment. There are no guards there. Walk calmly, don't run. Will there be any trains on Gorlice from here? Stasik asked. I can't say anything. There have been few trains in the last 2 days. We're very grateful to you. You've helped us out so much. Good luck to you wherever you are. Thanks you so much again. We waited for him to leave, crawled out from under the tarp and jumped to the ground. No one saw us walk down to the embankment and out of the station. We didn't know Tarnow and had to ask directions once. We saw many German soldiers in the town, but they paid no attention to us. Be careful. They are Gestapo men, explained a local man from whom we asked for directions. Once out of town, we checked the map, found the railway line we wanted and walked along it for several hours. There were no trains that day. At first we covered the distance easily, but at noon a snowstorm began, and we, utterly exhausted and hungry, knocked on a peasant's house and entered. It was warm inside, and in the dim light of the lamp we recognized a man and a woman. Before we could open our mouths, the man asked sharp, "Who are you and what do you want?" "We are cold and very tired," I replied. "Can't we have a little rest at your place?" The woman was about to say something, but the man shouted at her. "Shut up," he said, turning to us. "There is no room in my house for heathens. Understood, no room." "But we are not pagans," Stasek tried to object. "You behave like Gentiles," interrupted the master of the house. "When you are Gentiles or Jews." Then I realized that Stasek and I had forgotten peasant customs. I grabbed the indignant Stasek by the arm, took him outside, walked around the house with him, and knocked on the door again. "Come in," came a man's voice from within. Praise God." Taking off my ski cap, I said, "Ill forever and ever," replied the owners and invited us to sit down. "Share the food with us." "God will repay you for your kindness." I said the words that came to mind. The man, pleased with the lesson he had learnt, looked at us in silence. His wife was fiddling by the stove. I inhaled the aroma of boiling potatoes with pleasure. We had not eaten anything hot for 30 hours. "Are you sneaking abroad?" My host's question interrupted my thoughts of food. "Yes," I answered, not thinking it necessary to conceal anything. "You could not have come from far away, for each of you has only a pair of legs. The snow is deep in the mountains." "We didn't go through the mountains," Stasek replied. I understood that. Then how did you walk, and how do you intend to go on?" Stasek and I looked at each other and remained silent. "If you don't want to tell me, don't tell me," said the man, and after a moment's hesitation he added, "My son went abroad last week." Oh, we exclaimed in unison. "He said he was going to try to sneak into France. It's a long journey, especially in winter, and he's only 20 years old." We were silent, not knowing what to say. The man was silent too. At that time the woman put a bowl of hot mashed potatoes with pork fat on the table, and the man invited us to the table. The four of us sat around the table on stools. "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit," said the man and took a wooden spoon. "Amen," we replied, taking our spoons. Stasek and I waited until the owner, followed by his wife, scooped up the potatoes, which were heavily coated with pork fat, and dipped our spoons into the bowl. The procedure was repeated several times until the bowl was empty. Stasek tried to speak during the meal, but I discreetly nudged him in the side. I knew that peasants considered it impolite to talk while I thanked my host profusely. Come on, maybe it will give you strength," he said. The woman took the bowl and spoons from the table, lit the oil lamp and hung it on the wall. The business was finished, and she finally sat down and looked at Stasek and me carefully. "You are so young," she remarked. The woman wore several wide skirts, her head covered with a scarf. In the flickering light of the lamp, she looked as if she had stepped out of a painting by a famous Polish artist. "When are you going home?" she asked. "In a year, maybe 2, I answered. "God willing," she sighed. "We miss our son so much. I can't wait for him to come back." "You have only one son? No more children?" Stasek asked. "Only one," the woman replied in a trembling voice. In the silence, the woman wiped her eyes with the hem of her petticoat. "Hey, he didn't have to go." The man entered the conversation, but he and a few other boys got it into their heads that they needed to escape abroad. They said they wanted to fight, and they left. We were silent again. What was there to say? We fled abroad too. "He was a good son," the man continued. "If I had been against it, he would have stayed, but I don't." When he saw his wife crying, he grumbled. "It's too late to shed tears, Mother. God willing, we'll manage without him. If only we were healthy, and he'll surely come back one day." Stasek looked at his watch. It was early 7 o'clock. The snowstorm was still raging outside. It was necessary to decide what to do next. "If you want to stay the night," said the master, "we'd be glad to. I will bring some straw, and you will sleep warm for the night. If you decide to go, I'll harness a horse and give you a little lift. You see, we want to get to Sanok and cross the Hungarian border," said Stasek. "You can't go all the way to Sanok. It's too far. We have to go this way. I took a map out of my pocket and showed the railway junction. I can't read, the man said in an apologetic tone, but there is a railway junction about 10 miles from here. Is that where you want to get to? Yes, that's it. We hope to go from there to Gorlice on a German freight train, and from there via Jaslo to Sanok. There are a lot of Germans there, said the man after a pause. That's what my neighbour told me. He was there. But I can give you a lift on the country roads closer to Gorlice. In a snowstorm, you can't fear the Germans. They won't give us any trouble.
Then we must leave to be at the railway junction at dawn tomorrow. We can't get on the train in the dark, I explained. Well, I'll go and feed the horse, and you sit by the stove. I'll be done in less than an hour, and we'll be on our way. We pulled the wooden bench over to the stove, sat down and pressed our backs against its warm side. The woman took a small bench and a wooden bucket and went somewhere. Soon she came back and poured us a cup of still warm milk. Have some milk, she said, holding out the cups. It's going to be a very cold night.
It had been so long since I had drunk milk that I felt a great pleasure. But then the door opened and the master came in, wearing a sheepskin coat and a huge fur hat. We quickly dressed, took our rucksacks and thanked the hostess for her hospitality. God will repay you for your kindness, I said in farewell. God will not forsake you, I heard in reply. Outside, a horse, covered with a blanket, was waiting for us in a low wooden sleigh lined with straw. We sat down, the man swung his whip and the horse started off, snorting.
We travelled for over an hour. Several times we got out of the sleigh and ran alongside to restore circulation. The snowstorm subsided a little, and the sledge slid noiselessly on the thick layer of snow. In the silence, there was an occasional squeak of harness and the scrape of a stone under a horse's hoof. We passed several villages in which not a single light shone. Just after midnight, we stopped in front of a small farm. A man unharnessed the horse and led it into a barn. He took off his tunic and carefully covered the horse and placed a wooden bucket of fodder in front of it. "No one will resent us for coming here?" Stasek asked. "The owners are dead. In September, the Germans shot them from an aeroplane. They killed them all, and their son didn't come back from the war. Even the cattle were shot."
"Bloody bastards," Stasek swore. "May they all burn in hell," said the man. An hour later we were on the road again, and by 6 in the morning we reached the outskirts of Gorlice. "I will not take you any further. The Germans will stop you in the town," explained our guide. "You'd better avoid it too."
"We will be careful, we promised."
The sky cleared and the stars appeared. It was quite cold, and the snow crunched under our feet. The man held out his hand.
"You have a long journey ahead of you. Godspeed and good luck," he said. As we shook hands, I felt the strength of his heavy peasant hand. He clamped the whip between my legs to free my hands and helped me put on my rucksack. Then he patted the horse affectionately, adjusted the harness, and got into the sleigh.
"Godspeed." I shouted goodbye. Pulling the reins, he turned the sleigh in the opposite direction and slid into the darkness.
It was still dark when we passed the centre of the town and came to the railway station. From afar we heard the puffing of a locomotive, the humming and shouting of the road workers. Some train was being moved to the alternate track. It was almost dawn when we saw a train approaching us. We jumped onto the goods platform and crawled and examined it. The main part of the platform was occupied by cavalry wagons. Next to them, there was a pile of sacks and hay covered with tarpaulin.
We carefully folded back the edge of the tarpaulin and made ourselves comfortable in the hay, with our backs to the train, and closed the tarpaulin. We were warm and cosy in our shelter, and besides we could see not only our platform, but also the next covered freight car.
Almost like being in a first-class carriage. Eh, Stefan?
I'd say more. Almost like a sleeper carriage, and it was as if we were going to Zakopane to go skiing on a day off.
We were comfortably approaching the first goal of our long journey, Sanok. The train stayed for more than an hour in Jaslo, where a few more wagons were hooked up to it. The next stop was in Krosno, where, On the contrary, part of the platforms were. We listened anxiously to the sounds, hoping very much that our platform would remain on the train, and breathed a sigh of relief when the train pulled away from the station, leaving cross snow behind. "It looks like we're going straight to Sanok," said Starzik to the cheerful clatter of the wheels. "There are no more big stations ahead."
We stayed in the shelter for the rest of the day, and although it was warm and cosy, we wanted to stretch out. The guards were only in the first and last carriages and did not walk on the train, so during the movement we lifted the tarpaulin and, as from the window of the train, admired the winter scenery running past. "What a pity the Germans don't carry night pots on these platforms," said Stasik. "I could use one of them now."
"I'm afraid you'll have to do without a pot," I laughed. "Come outside, or I'm afraid for the hay."
Crouching low, so he wouldn't be seen by the guards, Stasik climbed onto the buffer and disappeared among the load. A few minutes later I saw him straighten to his full height to button his trousers. Then, obviously realizing that he had made a mistake, he sat down and crawled back.
"Feel better?" I asked.
I am, but it's too windy," he replied with a laugh, and glancing at his watch, added, "We must arrive in Sanok," he said without finishing the sentence.
Without finishing the sentence, he grabbed me by the arm and pointed to the end of the train. There, on the roof of the carriage, a guard stood on all fours. We dived into the hay, and I watched the German through the gap left in the tarpaulin.
"He probably saw you when you got up, Stasik. What's he doing now?" "Hey, sitting on the roof of the carriage across from ours. All right, he's got a gun."
Oh my God, so he saw me. Maybe we should jump off the train.
"Wait, don't rush. What if he changes his mind and doesn't come after us?"
But I was wrong. The guard, holstering his pistol to free both hands, climbed down from the roof and crossed over the buffer to the neighbouring platform. He began to examine the wagons methodically, then lifted the tarpaulin and, holding the pistol in his right hand, rummaged under the tarpaulin with his left, judging from the sound. There was also hay under the tarpaulin on the neighbouring platform. He gradually approached us. I informed Stashek about all his actions.
"Let's jump. Right now. Come on, Stefan. Oh, the train's going too fast. We'll never make it. They'll shoot from the last carriage. But at least we'll try. If we stay here, he'll shoot us like rats in a hole. Let's jump off, Stefan." Mush, I hissed. "He's very close."
I felt Stasek trembling, and his trembling was transmitted to me. I saw that the German was coming closer and closer, and I realized that, having discovered our hiding place, he would immediately start firing. Nevertheless, I absolutely refused to jump from the train. In a hurry to jump from a train that was rushing at full speed meant, at least, broken limbs, and most likely we would have been shot by the guards from the last carriage. I was sure that this German had warned guards that he was going in search of hares. I still held out hope that he would stop searching and leave.
But he didn't. Not only that, he sat down on the edge of the platform and dangled his legs. He sat quite close, a few feet away, putting his pistol in its holster. He rested his hands on the edge of the platform, jumped onto the buffer, and balancing himself, began to make his way carefully to our platform. He grasped the edge of the platform. A little more, and he was going to climb up. He was literally 2 steps away from me. Without a moment's thought, I threw back the tarpaulin and kicked him hard in the face. The German was thrown back, but he did not let go of the edge of the platform, frantically clinging to it with his fingers, and tried to pull himself up. His face, with broken nose and blood-stained lips, appeared again over the edge of the platform. I kicked him again with my foot, shod in a heavy ski boot, but he still did not unclench his fingers from the platform. I kicked him fiercely until he unclenched his fingers. As he fell, he tried to hold on to the buffer, but in a few moments he fell under the wheels of the speeding train with a terrible scream.
"Did you see anyone else gasping?" I asked Stashek.
I don't know. I wasn't looking round. We have to leave now. The guards from the last carriage might come to find out what's going on. Then we'll be in trouble."
"But the train is going too fast," said Stasek. "You said yourself that they'd shoot us if we tried to jump off at full speed."
Suddenly it hit me. Come on, get a move on. I've got an idea. We left our rucksacks on the platform and slipped down onto the buffer as inconspicuously as possible. The train was apparently travelling up an incline and the clutch was slack. After fiddling about for a few minutes, I unhooked the platforms. The distance between the platforms was increasing, and the tail end of the train, along with the last carriage containing the guards, was gradually slowing down. "Ready?" I asked Stashik. "I will not jump," he said. "Can't you see the speed?" We were trapped. The train, having lost some of its carriages, was clearly gaining speed. A few minutes passed like this, and suddenly we felt the brakes. The Germans noticed that they had lost some carriages. "Ready. Ready," shouted Stasik. Of course, it is much easier and safer to jump from the last wagon. There is less chance of getting hit by the wheels. I jumped first and rolled in the snow. Stasik landed a few seconds later. We jumped up and ran into the woods. Behind us, we heard the squeal of brakes. The train was slowing down. After running a few hundred meters, we stopped to catch our breath. "Hey, they will easily spot us from the tracks and chase us," said Stasik. "We must go forward." "Well then, let's go." We knew we were near Sanok, but we didn't know where. But we didn't want to stop and look it up on the map. It was beginning to get dark, and that gave us a certain advantage. But the tracks in the snow, suddenly we came to a well-tempt road, which after a couple of miles led us to a small village. It was getting quite dark and the stars were sprinkling out in the sky. It was freezing. All we could think of now was to spend the night in the warmth. A light was on in one of the houses, and we knocked gently on the door. At first, no one reacted to our knock, but after a short pause, the door was opened by a girl. When we entered the house, we saw an elderly peasant woman and two girls, obviously her daughters. We wanted to introduce ourselves, but the lady of the house interrupted us. "Don't bother. We know everything. You're fleeing abroad. Others have been here before you." "You are lucky to have come to us," said one of the girls. "There are mostly Ukrainians in the village, and now they work for the Germans. They get paid for every Pole they catch." "No. True, they often kill the fugitives themselves," her sister added. "But why?" "The Germans promised them that Ukraine would be independent, and these fools believed. They fed us a hot dinner and explained how best to get to the Hungarian border. The way was difficult. We were in the foothills of the Carpathian Mountains. The border stretched along a mountain range gradually rising to the south. The easiest way was along the San River, but just in the valley lived Ukrainians who hunted those who liked to cross the border. The second way was much more difficult. We had to follow a compass over rough terrain through forests, at least 2 days of trudging through snow, climbing peaks, hiding from German and Russian patrols. The German-Soviet demarcation line ran along the valley of the San River. In addition, there was the danger of encountering wolves. In winter, packs of wolves would come down from the mountains and attack people and livestock. Having received comprehensive information, we were just about to leave when the girls brought us 2 pairs of skis. These are the skis of their brothers. They have not returned from the war. The snow is deep in the mountains and you will need the skis very much.